Now what's nice about doing this, because one challenge I saw, is I saw libraries that said, we're going to start a World of Warcraft program. Now, running a World of Warcraft program in a library space has a lot of challenges, not to mention an awful lot of money in order to be able to, because, as you can imagine, Blizzard is not too keen on giving out bundled licenses to both World of Warcraft and all of the expansions on every computer in a lab. And by the way, you have to have a credit card to set up that account if you just, and so there's a lot of hurdles. But many libraries were doing it because there was someone on staff that liked World of Warcraft. Now, libraries are funded by outside organizations. That's why they exist. And when that outside organization says, hey, why are you running World of Warcraft? You've got to have an answer for that. And that was a challenge. So by using this process, so you choose games, you facilitate the gaming, and then what you're able to do is you're able to assess the game activity back to the goals that you started with. And that's the process. So the library starts with their goals, uses this process to select the games, and then they can assess to see, are these games meeting these goals? So that when the funders come knocking and say, hey, why is it you're doing Dance Dance Revolution? You can say, oh, well, it helps us with this and this, which are some of our goals, and here's how it's made a difference. Now, one of my research areas is assessment, which is why you hear me sticking a lot of assessment in here. But for libraries, especially now, if a library is not assessing its value, they're having trouble. And so assessment is really at the key of a lot of these decision-making processes. So I put together this model, and actually what I did to help people see what was going on with it is I taught a class via YouTube. So you can find this class at tinyurl.com/GIL course. And actually I have selected slides from today's presentation. I don't have all of them, but I have a few of the important ones, including I think this URL is on there. What I did is, last summer, I teach a lot of classes online. I've been teaching online for 10 years. And in fact, my teaching gig this semester at Syracuse is I'm teaching a class of 20 Syracuse professors how to teach online on Blackboard. It's a semester-long class. So that's a challenge, especially since a number of them don't really want to be there. So I've been looking at online education for about 10 years, and what I did is I was teaching an online class. I had Syracuse University students. We also have a consortium of library science programs, of some of the top library science programs, where we share online classes with each other. So it was offered to this consortium of people. And then what I did for every day of the month of June, I put out one video on YouTube in the Gaming and Libraries class. And that's all still there. So you can see a 30 video series. It was at least one video a day. And what was cool is that it brought together not only the students in my class, but it also brought out students from other schools who wanted to learn about gaming and libraries. Librarians played along, and the American Library Association facilitated a discussion board for this. Then we started to pick up some of the folks in the gaming industry. This is where my Board Games with Scott comes into play, where I had been doing this video series for about 5 years, and a lot of the folks in the industry, in the board game industry, knew who I was. So I used Board Games with Scott to talk about this class and began to get people from the industry seeing what was going on with libraries and realizing there's some opportunities there that aren't being touched. So this is still out there if you want to go and watch 30 videos. They're all between 10 and 30 minutes, and you can watch the whole stream. It takes like about 7 hours to watch me going blah, 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 kind of like I am right here. But I used that model that you just saw to coordinate a good chunk of the class and sort of organize, here's how to think about games, which became the book that I passed around. So what's next? What brings me here? So I've been talking with a number of folks here at MIT. I've got a sabbatical for the next year. And what I want to look at is actually in line with what's going on around here. So I want to talk with some of the different labs, get some ideas of where I might fit. There's 2 big projects that are bubbling up. So one future, Polaris is a library systems provider. So in the world of libraries, there's 3 or 4 companies that build the computing systems that make libraries work. So the circulation system, the interlibrary loan system, all the book organization, it's all a system, and in many cases, more and more, it's becoming a hosted system. So the library signs up with Polaris. Polaris then provides this whole system. And I've been talking with them about creating a better interface to their search, with their search tools that's based on the same sort of scaffolding that goes on in video games. Video games, as you know today, you don't usually have to read the manual because there's a series of scaffolding exercises that teach you all the aspects of the game. When you go to a library search site and you search on the advanced search, what you're given is this page with 27,000 forms on it, which can be overwhelming. That's kind of like if you jump to the end of a complex video game, here are the 18,000 things your character can do now. Good luck on that, which is how video games were 10, 15 years ago. You'd have all your abilities at the beginning, and you'd have to puzzle, actually maybe even longer than that. So what I've proposed is creating a search interface that is unlocked bit by bit as you search. And you're sent on little quests that you have to use aspects of the search interface, and then more interface appears. So you learn as you go through. And so we're talking with Polaris about creating this game-based interface. The idea is it's designed to replace the librarian getting up in front of the class and saying, all right, students, we're going to talk about a title search. This is what it looks like. We've all been through that. It's not particularly effective. So the idea is to replace that activity with a quest-based activity that's actually going to be dynamically generated based upon the first search a user does. So you tell everyone, search on something you like. It'll then search the catalog and create a series of quest objectives, and then give the person a set of quests that unlocks more and more of the search interface. And then when they're done with it all, they now then know how to use all the interface. So that's one project that we're looking for some partners who might be involved in playing along with. The other big piece that I've been working on, so I've been looking at the constructionism work that's gone on, and the first book that came out 20-ish years ago had some examples of analog games. But that seems that, at least in the research I've been reading, the analog game track has kind of been dropped. But it's been only the last 15 years where analog games have gotten really interesting. Since about the mid-90s is when we began to see a lot of advancement in mechanisms in board and card games. But those really haven't been brought back into play, at least not in the research that we're seeing. I've seen some folks talk about using board games as a prototype for the video game. But I'm starting to look at, well, how could board and card game design as the focus be used as a pedagogy to live alongside digital game design? My focus in these studies would actually be in the content integration, focus on a process where students are integrating content. Because what I've seen with libraries is the coolest library programs are when they have the patrons making games. That's when it gets really exciting, neat stuff happens. And I really want to explore that more. Within the schools, again, there's those folks that have been tying in recreational games in schools to different school learning standards. So I want to say, well, let's look at board or card game creation that ties into those learning standards by creating some lesson plans and models, creating a board game design toolkit that's an analog toolkit that gets people engaged with each other. Because a lot of classrooms, as you may know, don't have a lot of computers. They don't exist. And so a lot of teachers are also overwhelmed by the idea of, you mean I have to learn to program if I want to have people using Scratch to make games? That's kind of, and I have to teach them to this test anyway. I don't have any free time to do anything other than teach them content. So what my hope is to say, all right, can we make a board and card game design project that would fit inside your school day, that would not take up so much time, and that would fit inside what you're trying to do? So that's really what I want to explore, tying it in with the goals of school librarians to support the curriculum. So the project I'm trying to get funded now, and that I'd work on when I would be here over the next year, would be a lot of this, trying to model out different interesting board and card game elements, bring them together, and then create a toolkit for teachers to use, and then do an online class via YouTube, like I did for my gaming and libraries class. That would be free for educators, homeschoolers, and librarians to teach them how to use this stuff. So that's what I'm trying to get funding for at the moment. That's kind of where I want to move. So I think that's probably a good time to pause and take questions.
So did I get called on? I wanted to make sure. So recently, a colleague who's still at Ohio University, where I just left, told me the library, among some other departments on campus, has decided to do something called the Common Experience Project.
The Academic Commons?
Yeah.
Is it?
Andrew?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She says yes. I'm a fine believer. And the execution, he had asked specifically because he's playing Fallout 3 just as a player.
Right.
And his area of research, I was about to say, is completely different from games because it's sports. They're the same thing. I love you, Abe.
The good news is that we're studying sports informatics. So we actually have a faculty that's doing how to supply information for sports.
We're just teasing him. I'm just eating up your time. So he
This
was.
is your time.
Apparently the common experience that they're doing now is the apocalypse. Is it a good apocalypse or a bad apocalypse? I don't know.
It's
But
post-
post-apocalyptic something.
yeah.
What
I
are
think
we
they're
going
doing
to do?
related readings and.
Okay.
what are we going to do when the end times come? And apparently Fallout is an option. So what they're doing is they made a bunch of copies of Fallout 3 available through OU's library, where students come in as part of this project, get a copy, play it, and the person running that aspect of it said, okay, try to get to this point in the game for this week, and then post to your blog about your response. And I'll be honest with you, I thought that was kind of dumb, that they were doing it so asynchronously. I was kind of surprised that they didn't get together. I mean, when you had mentioned the whole book club thing,
Right. So
why don't we have something like that for digital games that goes on in libraries? Like, has any library that you've talked to done that, where it was more, instead of reading Oprah's selection for the month, let's all play, oh God, what's the thing that just came out? Vanquish, Friday games last week. Let's all play Vanquish and then get together and talk about it.
Oh God, what was that thing that just?
Oh God.
We actually, so one of the organizations that I started with the ALA was the Games and Gaming Members Initiative Group. And so through that group, we're getting the librarians that are really keyed up in games to talk about it. And we started a game of the month, the game club basically, where we would post, let's all go play this game, and then now let's talk about what happened there. As far as I know, libraries haven't taken on that model, but that was part of what we were trying to do, because we thought, that'd be really cool, just like get everyone playing the same book, or reading the same book, get everyone playing the same game. Well, there's actually interaction.
Super Wuthering Heights brothers.
Yeah.
Sisters, sorry.
Actually, I did play the Pride and Prejudice board game, which was all about being romantic and chasing around different lovers, and it was in a pink box, and it was only in German, and I didn't buy that well. But yes, I think that's a good idea. The bringing people together for the synchronous experience, and just like you say, rather than send people away, have them in a group like this playing the game, exploring as a group, because you could easily do one of those sort of group play things where people shout out what to do and you talk about what's happened, if that's your goal. And so we are seeing more universities take on the everyone do the X at a time, and the library is looking at a way to glom onto it. We're at a point really where a lot of libraries are trying to figure out what to do with games, but many people don't have the breadth of gaming experience to bring to the table. So it's kind of like, we're going to support books, but I haven't read much. And I'm sure you all can understand that. I see a lot of nodding, because you probably dealt with that as well, with people engaging with people who are trying to get engaged with games who haven't, a lot of the students actually, who haven't read broadly, if you will, who haven't played broadly, and understand the gaming experience. That's what they missed, is that it's not about, it broke my heart when I go to a library and say, yeah, we're doing board games, and you walk in and there's a room in the corner, a stack of board games shut up, or piled up in the corner, they throw in the teens, they close the door. And that's the gaming experience. And that's where I talk about, and I coach libraries, pull out the board games, set them up, set up the video games, have people there to teach people how to play them, because we're really facilitating experience, and they weren't facilitating. That's what it missed. And just like libraries facilitate an information experience, that's really what libraries do, is you come in, you have a question, they work you through the question, they work you through databases, they're facilitators, trying to help them think about they're facilitating a game experience. And this also applies to schools, community centers, anywhere where you're facilitating the play that others are going through.
So as a researcher, when I think about games in libraries, I'm always thinking, okay, I teach video games, video game theory, and one of the problems that we have is how do we make the games accessible to the students? And mostly, I'm very much into teaching weird games, old games that are for obsolete platforms, or things that are not commercial. So I would like to hear if you have any insights about some of those problems, because that's one role of academic libraries that I think that is not really dealt with. I think the only people who are setting up a program like that is University of California, Santa Cruz.
Yeah, there's a couple libraries that are just starting to wrestle with that issue. How do you do the preservation and access to older games? And we've been dealing with it with other forms of media. Preservation of access of wax cylinders. Because there's one of the things that Syracuse has is an audio archives where they have wax cylinders and a number of older formats of audio that's, for certain scholars and studying certain areas, that's really important. And so you've got all these issues of, do you digitize, but then you lose. Just like, in your case with a lot of these games, do you run some sort of an emulator, but then you lose out on certain aspects that were important because of what you're studying. It goes along with the digitizing of books. Does a digitized copy of one of Shakespeare's tomes where he wrote notes in the margins, if you have a digitized copy of that, is that good enough? And the answer is really it depends. It depends upon the need. For some people, yeah, that's going to be enough. For other scholars who want to see aspects of the penmanship, who want to look at the paper, who want to look at what's going on. So you're hitting on something that there's a few libraries that have figured out this is a problem. That's about where they are. And it's to say, how do we apply the same thinking that we have to all of these other formats to games? And the sad part is we're a little late. It's kind of like, hey, some horses ran out of that barn about 30 years ago, maybe we can catch them. So I think we're at a point now where you've got some special libraries, and that's really where it's coming out of, special libraries that have some of these collections and are saying, how do we facilitate access? And it's always one of the challenges, this is the difference between libraries and museums. Libraries are designed as a point for people to access the materials, and museums curate the materials and have very restrictive access to tiny portions of the collection. While libraries are more about, we have this entire collection that we want to facilitate access to, but how do we deal with that without ruining the stuff? So I have to say, I know some libraries are working on it, and they're really at ground level. How do we pull this off? Just like there's some libraries working on how do we archive the internet? Should we archive the internet? Library of Congress said, we're just going to archive all of Twitter. Okay. As soon as that kind of goes against the whole idea in libraries where you select. You select things, and so part of what your guidance can be to libraries is to say, here are culturally important artifacts to focus on selecting. Because that's the challenge libraries have, is knowing out of all of those Atari 2600 cartridges, why should they make sure and curate E.T.? Why was E.T.? And we know E.T. was actually a kind of important game to talk about, but if you didn't know that, you wouldn't think to curate E.T., especially when someone says, oh, that was an awful game. It's like, yeah, that's the point. That's kind of, this is an important game in the collapse of the Atari. So that's kind of where we are, is your advice could be helpful.
Kind of related to that, you mentioned special collections, and it seems like there's another area. I was wondering if there are any libraries working either with game studios or publishers. Kind of, if you think about, collecting the papers of authors so that you can study later on their intent and their practice, it seems like there's a lot of also that history that's disappearing of game designers and their processes. John Romero's, doing these interviews with game developers, and he's creating this online archive. But do you know of any libraries that are even just saying, we'll take your stuff, company X, when you're done with it, or?
I think we're kind of, as I alluded to earlier, at the point where those kind of gifts are just starting to surface. Because a lot of times those collections of papers, the way it happens is someone dies, they say, I give all of my stuff to X library gets piles and piles of boxes of junk, and then they start digging through it and say, oh, look, there are these things from Jules Verne, maybe this is important. And so that's kind of it's not something it's either when someone who feels they are important contacts the library and says, would you like to have my papers, what I've collected, or when someone dies and they bequeath the thing. And so I think as we begin to see more people in the game industry die, this is what we talk about, as we begin to see that happen, I think we'll see more of that happen naturally. The other angle of that is, I don't know which of the large game studios have corporate libraries. So there are many, corporate librarianship is actually a very solid path of librarianship, and actually one of the most lucrative ones that people are being hired into, where you go into a corporation or a company, and at Syracuse we've got 5 degrees out of our information school. One is libraries, but the others are all IT degrees. And so we have a lot of students who can talk about non-library stuff, or talk about library stuff in non-library terms. And they're being placed in corporations where they're really doing that kind of archival, that kind of curation, but they're not calling it those scary library words. So I think the corporate library angle may be another process if there are corporate libraries out there to say part of what we're doing, it's that preservation of cultural heritage I talked about earlier, empowering libraries to say, hey, we need to preserve the culture of the space that we're in, and helping our library students now realize that.
I have a little story about that. A game publisher that will remain unnamed. Basically, they
much-
realized that they had a lot of games. They got copies from all the games that they were publishing, and they had a pile of games that they didn't know what to do with, so they were going to throw them in the trash. And you know, there was one of the people working there who were like, "What are you doing? Can we give it to the library?" And apparently, you know, the libraries around, they didn't know what to do with it, so nobody wanted to take it. Also because it was a lot of material, and it was one scholar who's interested in digital media and games that was like, "I'll find a corner in my office, don't throw it away." And these were apparently like rare Japanese games.
Okay.
They were like, "Well, we're not playing this, we don't know what to do with this, we're going to throw it in the trash." So I think that part of the problem is that corporations don't realize that they have, that's something they should keep track of. It's not something that they're not aware. So we're very jollily getting rid of, you know, half a room of games because they didn't have space.
And that's true for other forms of media as well. If you think about how many miles of film reel sat in studios dumpsters because they didn't think anyone wanted it, how many books and tomes just got pitched out. So I think it's in line with other stuff, and it really comes to raising awareness and having the libraries that are doing it being louder about saying, hey, this is a topic we're collecting on. You know, nowadays in the book space, if someone has old books, they know that they can put them out in these auction spaces, and a lot of libraries bid on them to build up their collections. And when that starts happening, like when Sid Saxon, they took his estate and did auctions with his estate, and he had this amazing collection of board games that just kind of got scattered to the winds because they auctioned off parcels of who knows what and where. So I think this is something that we need to be doing to helping people realize it's important, and then encouraging libraries that do decide to get involved to publicize what it is they're doing so folks know. But the challenge is, you know, many gifts are junk. And as one of the things we tell our students, no gift is free. You know, any gift comes with a cost, and helping the libraries realize what's important to keep out of all this is something that we can do.